Toto Wolff just got cornered by the one driver everyone was starting to doubt. George Russell arrived in Barcelona with his season bleeding out, a teammate running away in the championship, Lewis Hamilton hunting him from Ferrari, and Mercedes still carrying the damage from Canada and Monaco. Then Russell did the one thing that made every excuse, every doubt, and every quiet whisper in the paddock look dangerous. He put the Mercedes on pole. But the shocking part is not the lap. The shocking part is what that lap exposed about Toto Wolff, Mercedes, and the mistake they may have made before the weekend even began. Because if Russell was really finished, if Antonelli had already taken control, if Hamilton had already pushed him out of the title fight, then Barcelona should have confirmed it. Instead, Barcelona revealed something much worse for everyone who wrote him off. Maybe Russell was never the problem. Subscribe to the channel. The first mistake people made with George Russell was thinking Barcelona came out of nowhere. It did not. The signs were there long before the final qualifying lap. They were just buried under the noise of a season that had become almost impossible to read clearly. At the beginning of the year, Russell did not look like a driver fighting for survival. He looked like a driver ready to fight for the championship. Mercedes had arrived with a completely changed car, built for a new era of Formula One, and Russell was not just another name inside that project. He was supposed to be the leader. He was the experienced driver. The reference point. The one Mercedes could trust when everything around the sport had changed. And Toto Wolff knew it. Before the pressure, before the mistakes, before the doubts started spreading through the paddock, Wolff had spoken about Russell like a driver who belonged at the very front. Not as a hopeful outsider. Not as someone waiting for permission. As one of the best. That is why this story matters. Because Barcelona was not just Russell proving a few critics wrong. It was the return of a version of Russell that Mercedes had already seen, already believed in, and almost forgot under the pressure of everything that followed. The season had started with a statement. Russell won in Australia. That should have changed everything in his favor. A win at the start of a new era is not just points. It is oxygen. It tells the garage the project works. It tells the driver the car can be trusted. It tells the rest of the paddock that Mercedes did not miss the regulation reset. But even that victory came with a shadow. Almost immediately, questions began forming around the Mercedes power unit. Rivals wanted answers. There were doubts about how the car was using its energy, how it was deploying power, and whether Mercedes had discovered something the others had not fully understood yet. And this is where Russell's season started to become dangerous, because even his best moments stopped feeling clean. A win was not just a win. A fast car was not just a fast car. Every success came with suspicion attached to it, and that matters more than people think. For a driver, confidence is not only built from lap time. It is built from trust. Trust in the car. Trust in the team. Trust that when you deliver, the result will stand and the story will not be stolen by something outside the cockpit. Russell had the speed, but already, the season was starting to tell him something uncomfortable. Nothing would come easily. And then came the teammate problem. Andrea Kimi Antonelli was not behaving like a rookie who needed time. He was not quietly learning in the background, making small mistakes, and asking for patience. He was winning. And when a teenage teammate starts winning inside the same team, everything changes. The questions become sharper. The cameras look harder. Every debrief feels heavier. Every bad lap is compared to the other side of the garage. That is the pressure Russell walked into, and it grew race by race. Because Antonelli was not just quick. He was becoming a symbol. A symbol of the future. A symbol of Mercedes moving forward. A symbol that made Russell's role suddenly look less secure than it had at the start of the season. And this is where the public story became too simple. People saw Antonelli rising and Russell stumbling, so they made the easiest conclusion. The young driver had taken over. The senior driver was fading. But Formula One rarely works that cleanly. Behind every result, there is a chain. One missed setting. One wrong strategy call. One car update that changes the feel. One failure at the worst possible moment. One penalty that turns a possible podium into nothing. And Russell was not being hit by one problem. He was being hit by all of them. That is what made Barcelona so explosive. It arrived after weeks of damage, but it also arrived at a track where the story had originally begun in a very different way. Barcelona had already been important to Mercedes. In testing, the car had looked stable there. Russell had looked connected to it. The early data had given Wolff and the team real belief. So when everyone returned to Barcelona, it was not just another circuit. It was a memory. A reminder of the version of the season Mercedes thought it was going to have. A reminder of the driver Russell looked like before the chaos. And that is the part people missed before qualifying. Russell was not trying to create something new. He was trying to find something he had already had. The feeling. The trust. The sharpness. The sense that the car would respond when he asked everything from it. Because once a driver loses that feeling, even slightly, the whole world can misunderstand what is happening. From the outside, it looks like hesitation. Inside the cockpit, it feels like the car is answering a question one fraction too late. That fraction is everything. It is the difference between attacking a corner and surviving it. Between believing in the front tires and waiting for them. Between taking pole and missing the moment. And Russell had spent weeks living in that uncomfortable space, where the car was still fast, but not always natural. That is why Wolff's position became so delicate. He could defend Russell, and he did. He could say the team had let him down, and he did. But the moment confidence became part of the conversation, the paddock heard something else. It heard weakness. Not because Wolff attacked him. Because in Formula One, even careful words can become weapons. Say a driver lacks confidence, and suddenly every mistake looks psychological. Every slow session becomes evidence. Every teammate comparison becomes a verdict. That is the trap Russell was in before Barcelona. He was not only fighting the stopwatch. He was fighting a story that had started moving without him. And then, before anyone could close that story completely, he reached the one place where excuses disappear. Qualifying. One lap. No traffic to hide behind. No strategy to blame. No race chaos to explain it away. Just the driver, the car, and the truth. And that is why the first block of this story does not really begin with pole position. It begins with the pressure that made that pole matter. Because if Russell had simply been fast in an easy season, Barcelona would have been impressive. But after Australia's suspicion, Canada's heartbreak, Monaco's disaster, Antonelli's rise, Hamilton's threat, and Wolff's careful public defense, Barcelona became something else. It became a trial. Not of whether George Russell could drive. Of whether everyone had been asking the wrong question from the start. But the real turn in Russell's season did not begin in Barcelona. It began when the car betrayed him while he was doing exactly what Mercedes needed him to do. Canada should have been the weekend that killed the doubts before they grew teeth. Russell had already shown the speed. He had already put himself in position. He had already placed the Mercedes where a championship driver places it, right at the front, with the race under control and the pressure flowing toward everyone else. And then the car lost power. Not a small drop. Not a tiny issue that could be managed with careful driving. The Mercedes started falling away because the electricity was gone, and in this new era of Formula One, losing that energy is not like losing a little speed on a straight. It is like trying to sprint while someone suddenly fills your shoes with sand. The car is still there. The driver is still fighting. But the weapon is no longer a weapon. That is what made Canada so painful. Russell was not beaten by Antonelli in a straight fight. He was not outsmarted by Hamilton. He was not exposed by a poor qualifying lap or a weak race start. He was leading. And then the race was taken from him. That detail matters, because this is where the public story began to split from the real story. From far away, people saw another missed victory. Another weekend where Russell did not convert. Another chance gone. But inside Mercedes, they knew something harder to admit. They had not watched Russell fail. They had watched Russell get failed. And Toto Wolff knew it too. That is why his words after this period carried a different weight. He was not just defending a driver for public relations. He was defending a driver because the facts made the criticism uncomfortable. Russell had been close. He had been fast. He had been doing the job. But Formula One does not give points for what should have happened. It gives points for what survives. And Russell's season was not surviving cleanly. Canada opened the wound, but Monaco infected it. Because Monaco was not just bad luck. It was confusion. A penalty. A pit wall mistake. A race that slipped through Mercedes' fingers, not because Russell lacked speed, but because the team failed to manage the moment correctly. At Monaco, every second feels like it has a blade attached to it. There is no room to breathe. No space to recover. If a team makes the wrong call, the driver cannot simply overtake his way out of trouble. The circuit locks him in. That is what happened to Russell. The penalty situation became a mess. The team did not serve it correctly. Another punishment followed. A possible strong result turned into nothing. 0 points. And 0 points do not explain themselves. They sit on the championship table like an accusation. People do not see the confusion behind them. They do not feel the radio tension. They do not measure the emotional cost of watching a podium vanish because the system around you misfires. They just see the result. And the result said Russell was falling away. But here is what made Monaco even more dangerous. The issue was not only inside Mercedes. There was also a wider problem with the way the penalty situation had been measured and handled. Another driver, Pierre Gasly, was affected too, and when that error was acknowledged, his result changed. That put Mercedes in a brutal position. Because if the official timing problem had helped damage Russell's race, and Mercedes had also made its own mistake in the way it responded, then Russell had been caught between two failures at once. One from the outside. One from his own team. That is a driver's nightmare. Because when the mistake comes from another car, you can be angry at a rival. When it comes from the officials, you can demand answers. But when part of it also comes from your own pit wall, the pain becomes more complicated. You still need to trust those people next weekend. You still need to believe the voice in your ear. You still need to arrive at the next race and hand your entire afternoon back to the same operation that just cost you. That is why Wolff's admission after Monaco mattered so much. He knew Mercedes had let Russell down. He said the team had made a mistake. He understood that the race could have been completely different. But the damage was already moving. Because while Mercedes was explaining what went wrong, Antonelli was building something that looked unstoppable. The young teammate was winning. The championship gap was growing. The future was no longer waiting politely outside the door. It was sitting inside the garage, taking trophies, taking headlines, taking emotional control of the team narrative. And suddenly, Russell was not only fighting bad weekends. He was fighting contrast. That is often more damaging than failure itself. A bad weekend can be explained. But a bad weekend beside a teammate's great weekend becomes evidence in the eyes of the world. That is when the whispers start. Maybe Russell cannot handle the new car. Maybe Antonelli has adapted faster. Maybe Mercedes has already found its next leader. Maybe the pressure of being the senior driver is beginning to crush him. And the worst part is that Russell could not fully destroy those whispers with words. Because drivers can explain, but lap times are louder. He could say the car did not suit him as naturally as before. He could say the changes made it harder to find confidence. He could say the results did not show the full picture. All of that might be true. But in Formula One, truth without performance is treated like an excuse. That is the trap. And this is where Wolff's public stance became so delicate. He tried to protect Russell. He reminded people that luck had not gone his way. He pointed toward the team's role in the damage. He pushed back against the idea that the issue was purely psychological. But at the same time, he admitted Russell did not fully trust the car. And that was the line the paddock grabbed. Because confidence is one of those words that changes shape depending on who hears it. To a driver, lack of confidence can mean the car is not giving the right feeling. The front tires are not speaking clearly. The rear is not stable enough. The braking point does not arrive with the same certainty. To a headline, lack of confidence sounds like weakness. That is brutal, but it is true. Once that word entered the conversation, Russell's struggle became easier to oversimplify. The car problem became a driver problem. The team error became a form slump. The official confusion became part of a bigger decline. And slowly, the wrong story started winning. Russell was no longer being seen as the driver who had lost points through a chain of failures. He was being seen as the driver being passed by the moment. That is why the Barcelona build-up felt so charged. Because everyone arrived with a version of Russell already in their mind. Some saw a driver who had been unlucky. Some saw a driver who was losing belief. Some saw a driver already beaten by Antonelli. Some saw Hamilton's Ferrari rise as proof that Russell was no longer even the biggest threat to his teammate. And then there was Wolff, stuck in the middle of all of it, trying to defend his driver without ignoring what had clearly gone wrong. That is a very difficult place for a team principal. If he protects Russell too strongly, it looks like denial. If he speaks too honestly, it looks like doubt. If he blames the team, he increases pressure on Mercedes. If he blames the car, he admits development may have moved away from Russell. If he says nothing, the paddock writes the story for him. That was the corner Wolff had walked into before Barcelona. And Russell's pole forced him back out into the light. Because suddenly, the evidence changed. The same driver who supposedly lacked confidence had produced the lap everyone else needed. The same driver who had been framed as fading had beaten Hamilton and Antonelli when the pressure was clean and immediate.